All right, welcome everyone.
Yes, hello. We're going to give everybody just a few minutes to get logged in to our next episode of Sustainable in the City, Thinking Upstream. Welcome.
We have a good episode today.
We do.
Talking about how do we clean water? What's going on with our water? I don't even get that. How do you clean water? You use water to clean other things. How do you clean water? We'll find out.
We are going to be talking about the second half of that water side too. We're going to be talking about wastewater treatment, about water reclamation, how Metro Water Services is doing that in a sustainable way for our community. It's fascinating stuff. You're going to get to see some little microscopic critters. It's going to be very exciting. So get yourself settled, get your lunch, get whatever you need, a pot of water, and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. As always, I'm Jenn Harrman. I am the Zero Waste Program Manager here at Metro Nashville Waste Services with the Zero Waste team, and I'm with my co-hostess with the mostest, Christina, who's introduced herself. And we, as always, are going to be utilizing the chat, so don't forget to have that open. Make sure that when you're chatting to everyone so we can keep the conversation going there as well. As you have questions, pop those in the chat. We'll be able to ask our guests today. We'll have plenty of time for questions this afternoon. So if you have questions, make sure those are going in the chat. Yeah. And we'll get started here shortly.
Definitely. And I have made this announcement. This might be the last time I'll make this announcement because I feel like this is the one where folks who have really been diehard fans of Patrick King, the previous co-hostess with the mostest, really excited about this Biosolids episode. So I just wanted to say that I am the new co-host as Patrick has moved on to fun and exciting and wonderful new pastures for himself. But we are very excited, and who knows, maybe he'll even be a viewer today because he was so excited about it. So just wanted to let all those fans know that your darling Patrick has moved on to a new opportunity, but I will do my best to carry the torch. So I think this will be my last episode to make that announcement because now I'm going to firmly be the co-hostess with the mostest.
I love it. I love it so much. This program has been such a wonderful program over the last year. We're on, what is this, episode 20, I think
so.
That we're on today, episode 19 or 20. So had a lot of really good discussions, a lot of really good talks, a lot of really good information about sustainability here in Nashville. So excited to keep that going, especially with you, Christina. And today, I think we're ready to get into it. It is 12:03. We've got a good number of our registrants popped in, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first off, I didn't share my little slide, did I? I sure didn't, but I've already talked about all of this. So just real quick, as a reminder. Oh my gosh, I'm not sharing my screen.
Jen, I was so excited to see your face.
This is the 20th episode, and I'm not on top of it. All right, so as y'all remember, it is Sustainable in the City. And again, if you have questions or need to connect with participants, do utilize that chat feature. We are going to be looking there for any of your questions that we're going to ask our panelists, or if you have any technical assistance needs, you can reach out to us in the chat. But you are here with Sustainable in the City, Thinking Upstream, presented by Urban Green Lab and Zero Waste Nashville. And I am really excited to introduce our panelist today, or our guest speaker today, John Lawrence. He works here as a colleague with me at Metro Water Services with the on the wastewater side or the water reclamation side. He is a treatment plant manager. He's worked in many capacities at many different treatment plants here at Metro Water Services, and is just a wealth of knowledge on all of the science and behind all of these processes and how they work and how they are sustainable for the city and how we treat our wastewater. So I'm really excited to have him. He is going to be doing a presentation for you today. So I'm going to pull that up so he can get started, and then I'm going to let him take over. So let me pull that up. And we'll get started. John, it's all you.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Yeah, my name's John Lawrence. I'm the treatment plant manager at the Dry Creek Water Reclamation Facility in Madison. I'm excited to be here today speaking on the topic of water reclamation and beneficial reuse. So today we're going to discuss the basic steps in water reclamation. And those steps are preliminary treatment to remove grit and protect plant operations, settling to remove solids, biological treatment to remove organic matter, disinfection to remove pathogens, and solids processing that provides a safe and sustainable product, and that being Music City Gold. Next slide, please, Jenn. So as you take a look at this early photos and photo in the 1800s, it gets you to wondering, why cities, big cities, Nashville, Chattanooga, Knoxville, even small cities, why would they build next to rivers and streams, lakes, any kind of a water source? And the thinking back then was the solution to pollution was dilution. And that's why these cities were built conveniently next to the rivers. Almost everything that happens in a water reclamation facility would happen in nature anyways. Solids would settle to the river bottom, nutrients would be removed from the water by plants, and organic matter would decompose. In that process, though, the health of humans and wildlife would be threatened. We could no longer fish and swim in the polluted waters. So the trick with water reclamation is that we hold the water within the plant until natural and engineered processes could remove the pollutants from the waste stream. We basically do what Mother Nature does, but in a controlled environment. Next slide, Jenn. So let's fast forward to 1948. The Federal Water Pollution Control Act was the foundation for the Clean Water Act in 1972. The authors of these acts recognized the urgency to protect our waterways and set wastewater standards across the country. That led to the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System that we refer to as the NPDES permit, that sets limits for the pollutants that are discharged to the waterways of the United States. Central Water Reclamation Facility was built in 1958 and expanded several times to accommodate the growing population of Nashville. And if you look around Central, you'll understand why, because there's townhouses and flats and just going up all the way around the Central Reclamation Facility. Next slide, Jenn. So Metro Water Services not only includes Davidson County, but also includes portions of Williamson, Wilson, Robertson, Rutherford, and Sumner counties. So you ask, how can Metro Water Services get wastewater from surrounding counties? Well, there are 118 sewer pumping stations. These lift stations are used for pumping wastewater from a lower to higher elevation. For example, we need to pump wastewater over a ridge to get it to flow by gravity to the treatment facility. Next slide, Jenn. And parts of the Metro Water Services water reclamation infrastructure include 3,100 miles of pipes, as I mentioned, 118 sewer pumping stations, 180 million gallons per day treated, and 216,000 customers. Next slide, Jenn. There are 4 reclamation facilities. Central, that I mentioned, was constructed in 1958. It has an average daily flow of 125 million gallons, and the capacity is 330 million gallons a day. The Dry Creek facility here in Madison was constructed in 1961 with a 24 million gallon a day average. Whites Creek was construction in 1976 with 37.5 million gallons a day. And the picture at the bottom is the Biosolids, or the nutrient recovery facility, that was constructed in 2009. Central and Dry Creek are currently under construction to to get rid of chlorine and go to UV disinfection. And also we're both facilities are going to be going under headworks construction. Central is under construction now. Dry Creek will hopefully have new headworks within 5 years. Next slide, Jen. This takes us to preliminary treatment. Preliminary treatment removes grit, rags, and solids that float, which may harm the operation of the rest of the plant. Bar racks, mechanical screens remove paper, rags, and other large solids. Sand and grit are removed by gravity, settling in a grit chamber. And if you look at the picture here on the left, that's an aerated grit chamber, and there's air pumped into that chamber, and it makes the water less dense, and the heavier grit and sand, rocks, whatever comes into the system, will settle out to the bottom. That tank is designed with convening walls at the bottom. And if you look to the back of that picture, you'll see a sprocket with some chains. And there's buckets that go along the bottom of that chamber, and it'll scoop up the grit and put it in an auger. And then the picture to your right will be the grit dumpster. I like to tell a story. After heavy rains, those dumpsters usually get full pretty quick. When we used to have the tours at the facility, I would always mention that I had found a pair of earrings that were looped together. And I always joked that I put them in an envelope and gave them to my wife for her birthday. And everybody just kind of looked at me like I was crazy, but I just kept talking. But yeah, that's when heavy rains come in is when we get most of the grit. And that grit is mixed with wood chips and taken to the landfill. Okay, next slide, please. Following preliminary treatment, the water moves to a clarifier or settling tank. This is primary treatment. Here, under very calm condition, sewage solids settle to the bottom of the tank. The solids that are at the bottom of the tank are called primary sludge. The sludge is pumped from the tank for treatment later elsewhere in the plant. What is left is a soluble food for the microorganisms in the aeration tank. So if you look at the picture to the left, that tank is in operation. If you'll notice the scum and grease that's closest to us in the picture. And if you'll notice, there's a flights floating in the background, and what that does, it moves real slow across the top, and it'll push all the grease and trash towards the trough, and that's how we skim off the solids that float. And then at the bottom, if you'll notice in the tank that's dry, those same flights or scrapers will scrape that settled primary sludge to a hopper, and it's sent off to be processed at a later time. This facility is Whites Creek, and it's pumped to our nutrient reclamation facility at Central. Okay, next slide, please. Microorganisms such as bacteria and protozoa can use the small particles in dissolved organic matter not removed in primary treatment as food. Secondary or biological treatment is performed in a tank containing thousands of pounds of starved microbes called activated sludge. Like us, they require air to live. They are aerobic organisms. Microorganisms in this aeration tank use the dissolved and particulate organic matter as food, producing more organisms. So to the left, you'll see, really can't tell it, but that's the aeration tank, and that the color is what we look at. Visually, the first thing you can tell is the brown chocolate milk color. That's what you're really looking for, and that's where all the organics come in. Settled sewage, we call it, and that breaks down the microorganisms are breaking down the organic material that comes into the aeration. To the right, you can see that's an air header with diffusers, and that's how we pump air with blowers into the aeration to keep that environment aerobic. And those are, we have the blowers and the motor horsepower range from anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 horsepower blowers. So it puts out a lot of air. Next slide, please. So how do we keep up with these microorganisms? The quickest way is microscopic examination. Although we do operational sampling, such as a 30-minute satellometer and a mixed liquor suspended solids, that gives us an indication of the amount of bacteria we have in the facility. So what you're looking at here is a predominance chart, and it's the microorganism versus the F&M ratio, which is food to microorganisms. And where we like to stay with our biomass is right in the middle, which you'll notice the good selling above that picture there. And that contains the rotifers, stock ciliates, free swimming ciliates. Now, as you venture to the left of that chart, you'll get into what's considered a younger sludge. And the problem with that is the younger sludge, they don't stay under, or the bacteria doesn't stay under aeration long enough for it to lose their cilia, and that's how they move through the water, and that leaves a turbid effluent because the bacteria doesn't want to settle. They'd rather bounce around and try to find food. So you venture to the right, that's an higher life form or the older bacteria, and it leaves a pin flock that kind of looks like sand. Again, that's that's indication of an older sludge, and we'd need to waste that older sludge out of the system to get back into that happy medium right in the center. Next slide, Jen. So what you're looking at here is a rotifer. This was taken from our Whites Creek aeration basin, and its main duty is to consume bacteria. And if you'll notice around that rotifer, that is the bacterial flock. You'll hear me reference that. And as the bacteria start to break down the BOD, which is biochemical oxygen demand, that's the food that's coming in from the wastewater pumping stations. Those bacteria, as they consume that, they secrete what's called a exopolysaccharide slime layer. And what that does is that when they go to settle, that helps them stick together and settle out. And it leaves a clear liquid, clear water coming out of the final clarification. But that's one of the things we really look for is, other than what we're looking, the organisms we're looking at is the background, the clear water, and the flock structure. And that's you want that good popcorn looking structure. And it's good to see the rotifers. Okay, next slide, please, Jen. Okay, this is a septoria. This is another good indication of a stable biomass and clear effluent water. What's interesting about this septoria is it's in the stalk ciliate family, and you'll notice it's attached to a stalk. And this is also considered the the vampire or the predator because it feeds on other ciliates. And how it accomplishes that, if you'll notice the tentacles that are protruding out of the head of that Sectoria, those tentacles are hollow. And what they do is they'll kind of bounce around until they find a food source, and they'll actually puncture the cilia, and then they'll draw the organic, rich organic food through that hollow tentacle. And once they deplete the area of food, they'll actually detach from the stalk, and then once they get around to another area, they'll retract that tentacle and form another stalk. Okay, next slide, please. Here's another Sectoria with stalk ciliates. Again, I'll point out this is a little better picture of the flock formation. You can see it's a good, healthy flock, and the clear liquid in behind. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is what we look for. This is, I guess, if you want to call it, the gold of the microorganisms. These are the stalk ciliates. These stalks can either be juvenile or they can be in a colony, like you see here. And what's unique about the stalk ciliates is they have cilia around the top of their mouth or the head, and they'll create a current. They'll flick the cilia around, and it draws the organic food, and that's how they feed. And that the cilia is a Latin term that means eyelash, and when you see it under the microscope and you can zoom in pretty well, it does resemble an eyelash. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, we looked at things we like to see. Well, here's something that we don't like to see. This is filamentous bacteria. This is Microthrix parvicella, and when it's gram stained, it's looks like purple spaghetti. If you look at the picture to the right, that is the aeration basin. And if you'll notice the foam on top of that aeration basin, that's what M. parvicella causes, is foaming. And the reason it causes the foaming is because they have a hydrophobic waxy outer layer, and then coupled with the air, they'll float to the top. Plus, that's where the food is that they feed on, is your fats, oils, and greases, and naturally that's going to float. And it doesn't settle well. Once it goes to the final clarification for settle, what that does is, if you'll notice how that all the filaments are, it's called interfloc bridging. And what that does, it increases in surface area without a corresponding increase in mass. So your solids can't settle, your biomass can't settle, and it stays more towards the top. And then you'll have problems with suspended solids and making permeates for suspended solids. The best treatment to get for this filament, you can use chlorine is probably the best. The chlorine's a non-selective in what it kills. The best way is just to totally get it out of the plant, either back truck, or if you could skim it and get it out of your facility, that helps. If you look closer to this picture to the right, you can see what it's supposed to look like, and then the foaming, later in the aeration tank. Next slide, Jen. That's the. And here you see, this is a water bear that Jenn had mentioned earlier. You can draw your own conclusions, but we say it's fighting with a rotifer. Don't know if it really is, but it looks like the rotifer has its foot hung around the mouth of the water bear. What's pretty unique about the water bear, I'm sure most have heard, it's been sent to the moon. It can live in nuclear fallout. It can dry up and come back to life years later. And the reason that it can do this is it secretes an enzyme, and right before it dries up, it'll secrete that enzyme. And it's kind of like it puts itself in a balloon, and then when it's rehydrated, it'll come back to life. So it's a pretty interesting. It's a higher life form, pretty interesting, and science is still studying on how it's able to do that. Next video, please. So after all the bugs' hard work, we send them to rest in a final clarifier. Here, the microorganisms settle to the bottom of the clarifier and form a blanket. Some of the bugs are sent back to the aeration to treat more wastewater, and some are wasted out of the system to be processed later. The clean water that flows out of the top of the clarifier is sent along for disinfection. This is our last opportunity to get the water as clear as we can get it before disinfection. So if you look at the picture to the left here, that's one of our final clarifiers. You'll notice the bridge out in the middle there. That's called a turntable. And you'll see the arms coming out on top of the water there with the ducts sitting on them. That skims if there's any trash or floatables that got through, aeration and into the final clarifier. That'll skim that trash and solids off the top. In this photo to the right, you'll see the turntable I was talking about, and at the bottom, it's like a big giant squeegee with holes in it. And the blanket at the bottom, this turntable turns real slow, and it has holes in the bottom, and it'll collect that blanket off the bottom. Like I said, real slow. If it moved real fast, you'd disturb the blanket, and your solids would go over the weir into the river. So this is where, after they've consumed and been active in aeration, this is where we send them to sleep. It's sort of like us after Thanksgiving dinner. We're ready for the couch and just to kind of veg out. So that's what they do here. Okay, next slide, please, Jenn. So the final step before releasing the treated reclaimed water to the environment is to kill microorganisms that might be a health hazard. So this picture to the left is a chlorine contact chamber. And this is where chlorine is doused into these chambers. And it's you'll notice the serpentine shape of the concrete walls. That gives the contact time to ensure that we get a good bacterial kill. Naturally, chlorine is an oxidizer, and that's what it kills the bacteria. This picture to the right, that's ultraviolet disinfection. That's what I mentioned. That's what Central Reclamation facility is going to, and the Dry Creek facility is also going to UV or ultraviolet disinfection. The main concern about ultraviolet is you have to have the water as clear as you can get it, because if you have any solids in the water, the bacteria can hide behind that piece of solid, and it won't get, the light won't penetrate that the bacteria. So that's, you got to really stay on top of your what's going on in your plant to ensure that clear water. And how that ultraviolet irradiation works is it alters the DNA of the bacteria so they can't reproduce. Next slide, Jen, please. So finally, we return their claimed water back to the Cumberland River. Our effluents, our final effluent is sampled daily and sent to our state-approved laboratory to ensure we are meeting EPA discharge permit limits. The water that's sent back to the river is actually cleaner than the water in the river. If you'll notice how clear that water is, that's good operation. That's what we like to see. Next slide, please, Jen. So this brings us to waste removal. From 1958 to 1994, Metro used incineration as primary means of disposal. Tighter emission restrictions caused incineration to become cost prohibitive. Next slide, please. So in 1994, Metro Water Service tried composting with a third party to manage the organic nutrients, which ended up in complaints and litigation. So if you'll notice the sheds there with the compost in it, it was very smelly in downtown Nashville at that time. Next slide, please, Ian. So in 1994, Metro Water Services began hauling to landfills. Dewatered raw sludge was sent to 6 different landfills in 3 states. In 2006, we were sending 100 truckloads per week and driving over 20,000 miles to the landfill to bury a sustainable resource. Next slide, please, Jen. And that brings us to the nutrient reclamation and being a good neighbor. Next slide, Jen. So what did we do? So in 2001, Metro Water Service began a study to evaluate a long-term solution to the solids and odor problems. Odors were a big problem in the area, and the neighborhood was growing. Next slide, please, Jen. So the solution was to build a nutrient recovery facility and add odor control to Central Water Reclamation Facility and the present nutrient recovery facility. It went into service in 2009 and has been operating since. The cost of the facility was around $130 million. Metro Water Services recognized the growing concern with limited landfill space, and it was an environmentally clear choice not to waste a valuable resource. Biosolids facility receives the excess organic matter from the Whites Creek and the Central Water Reclamation Facility. Next slide, please, Jen. So we have removed solids at various points in the wastewater treatment process. Primary sludge collected in the primary clarifier and waste activated sludge from the secondary clarifier. Organic material is mostly water, so we have to dewater the solids so it doesn't take up space in the digester. So this is the first dewatering process. This is our dissolved air flotation thickeners at the central facility. If you'll notice that cup with the material from the wastewater treatment plant, that's about a 1% solid. So what we do is we put it into these DAFs that we call them. And there's a polymer mixture with compressed air. And it's kind of like shaking a Coke can or a Coke bottle. And you'll get that fizzing effect. And what that does is it floats those solids to the top. And you'll see how thick to the right there. And there's skimmers in that DAF that come around, and they'll scoop those into a beach, into a trough, and then it's pumped for later processing. But if you'll see the paint scheme on that DAF tank there, all your clear liquid is in the center, and then your solids or your nutrients that have been recovered are at the top. Okay, next slide, please. Next step in the process is anaerobic digestion. Here, the organic material is pumped to the digesters and broken down by anaerobic bacteria that use the organic matter as food, producing methane and carbon dioxide. The main bacteria are acetogenic, methogenic. The organic material is mixed and kept heated to around 95 to 98 degrees for 15 to 17 days. Anaerobic digesters are similar to your stomach. You know, some may have heard that statement, but it is. I mean, you've got to really watch how you feed the digesters, because if you underfeed them, you'll get an upset digester. And then if you overfeed them, it's the same. You know, it's just like your stomach. If you go for days without eating, you know, you're gonna get sick, and you know, vice versa. If you eat too much, that you'll make yourself sick. I mentioned mixing the organics and the digester. This photo to the right is one of our digesters at the Biosolids facility. And these are vertical turbine mixers, and that just keeps everything mixed together and keeps the anaerobic bacteria happy. Next slide, please, Jenn. During the time in the digester, there's a lot of methane produced. So we capture that methane to help heat the organic material in digesters and for use in other equipment. And we capture this, the digester gas in this bubble. A lot of people say it looks like the Jiffy popcorn container, but that's what a lot of people say. But that's actually a lid inside of a lid, and there's forced air pumped in to keep the lids from touching each other. The lid holds about 500,000 cubic feet of digester gas, and that's what we use to power some of the equipment in the facility. Okay, next. There's so much methane produced that we have to flare the excess not captured and used for equipment and operations. About 1 million cubic feet of digester gas is flared every day at the Biosolids facility. You'll see that to the flare stack to the left. That's an enclosed flare. That's a good flare to keep the temperature regulated to burn off the volatile organic carbons, the methane. And then this flare to the right is the one we have here at the Dry Creek facility. It's just an open flare. It just constantly burns. The flare temperature on the left there at the Biosolids facility, it can flare it up to 1,400 degrees. The one here at Dry Creek facility, maybe 800 to 1,000. So that's just the difference in the flares, and that's just the excess methane that we don't capture and reuse. Next. After the anaerobic digestion process has stabilized organic matter, it's pumped to these centrifuges and mixed with a polymer mixture to help dewater the organic material. The reclaimed water is sent back to the treatment facility to undergo further treatment. So how these centrifuges work is it has a bowl and a scroll. It's exactly the way your clothes washing machine works in the spin cycle. So as it's spinning at about 2,500 RPMs, that's revolutions per minute, it's actually throwing the water out to the side, and the solids are scrolled out of the centrifuge itself. If you'll notice, the percent solids coming into the centrifuge is around 3%. So that's the second dewatering process. And when it comes out of the centrifuge, if you notice, this is what we call the cake in this bowl. That's anywhere from 20 to 30%. So we've reclaimed that water from the solids from the digester and sent it back for further treatment at the reclamation facility. Next slide, please. The cake is then mixed with a seed pellet and placed into a drum dryer with temperatures that exceed 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit to kill all remaining pathogens. This process helps form the pellets and produce a Class A exceptional quality product. The EPA has set temperature requirements and how long the organic material is exposed to heat. So if you look at this picture to the left, that's one of our drum dryers. The inlet temperature will be in the back of that drum. And that's where the organic matter is dumped into that drum, and it's heated. That drum's a 3-pass system. It's sort of like your clothes dryer. It has fins in it, and that keeps the organic material or the pellets moving towards this tube here. That's the outlet, and the outlet temperature on that drum is around 200 degrees. After these pellets are sorted and they come out into a uniform size, they're stored in this picture to the right. That's one of our silos. Like I said, they'll go through a shaker. It's 1 to 4 millimeters. That size is best for the spreading equipment for our farmers to spread on their fields. And how these trucks are loaded, they just pull right underneath that silo and then fill the trucks, and away they go to spread that on farmland. Okay, next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, the EPA has rules and strict regulations that govern biosolids land application and testing for different parameters. Metro Water Services Analytical and Research Laboratory tests for these parameters on a monthly basis. So these are all part of the 503 regulations. If you want to have some good reading, you can go on the EPA website and pull up these 503 regulations. It covers a little bit of everything: pH, volatile solids, the NPKs, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium that makes up the pellets, the organics in it. And then it also touches on the pathogens and vector attraction reduction. And what that is, it's that has to be stabilized. So flies and rats and raccoons, won't carry the organic material off site. And if you look at the bottom, the Class A exceptional quality exceeds all pathogen and vector attraction reduction. And that's what our Music City Gold's made of. Next slide, please. This is a nutrient analysis that goes on the bag. We have a third party that we work through that they actually bag the product, and the available nitrogen and the phosphorus and the potash is documented on the bag. If you'll look at the iron is 2%. That's pretty high for biosolids, which is also good for keeping your leaves nice and green and your yard green. We have a guy here at work that brags on his yard that his neighbors want to know the secret of how his yard stays so green. I think he's still mowing his grass right now. So next slide, please. So the majority of the Music City Gold is organic matter, and when you put this fertilizer on your yard or on your farmland, it actually is feeding the microbes in your soil, and that's it makes it easier for your plants to uptake the nutrients that they need. It also helps loosen up farmland that's been compacted by heavy equipment, it's like a sponge that's dry, and you put this organic material back into the soil. It'll help loosen that soil up. It's like getting the sponge wet again, and it'll attract earthworms too, and that helps with aeration in your soil, and that lets the organic material move through the soil, and the plant roots can uptake it. Next slide, please. There are odors that are produced in the process of water reclamation. That is why Metro Water Services invested in a bio-odor control system that captures odors from different areas of the facility. These odors are pulled through a concrete chamber that contain a media for bacteria to grow. Here, microbes metabolize the air constituents and convert them to harmless reaction products such as carbon dioxide and water. This biofilter must be kept moist for bacteria to grow. This biofilter here is at the central reclamation facility. And if you look in the background, you'll see the buildings in downtown Nashville. So this is just another way of being a good neighbor. Again, I mentioned how all the houses, apartments, and things like that are going up around the central reclamation facility. And we're just trying to keep the odor complaints down. Next slide, please. This is an odor control facility here at Dry Creek. You'll notice the inlet piping that's captured the sulfides, the odor from different areas of the facility. And then you'll notice this picture to the right. That's the actual inside the chamber. You'll notice the irrigation tubing going across the top of the media. Again, that keeps it moist and keeps the microbes healthy and reproducing and breaking down the solids. The temperature is pretty constant, anywhere from 55 to 105 degrees, depending on the time of year. So it's it does a good job and keeps our neighbors happy. Next slide, please. So some of the benefits are we've had $1 million in natural gas savings. We produced 18,500 tons of beneficial reuse product. Save $4 million a year in disposal costs. Reuse 309 million cubic feet of digester gas. We're producing Music City Gold at a 550 NPK, and the annual cost to landfill since October 2018 have been $0. Next slide, please. So this is a kind of a PowerPoint that proves that the community really likes Music City Gold. We've got high school students that are using it in their greenhouses to grow their own tomato plants and flowers and stuff like that. The Second Harvest Food Bank is using it in the sheriff's department. It's using it in their garden. And we have a lot of community gardens that really like using Music City Gold because of the plants that are grown and the vegetables that are harvested out of these gardens. Next slide, please. So this is some of the benefits from the biosolids. You look at, property value increase, 96 million, 112,000 trucks removed from the road. Again, that's saving diesel. There's a lot of effort that's gone into reusing and sustainability with Metro Water Services. But I guess the one that stands out to me is this one up here to the right. Sludge diverted from landfill is equivalent to 455 miles of loaded tractor trailers stretched across Tennessee. To me, that's keeping it out of the landfill. that's reusing it, that's making it available to gardeners and farmers, that's keeping, synthetic fertilizers, out of, off fields and the runoff from synthetic fertilizers. It's been a good investment, and it's Metro Water Services. We're proud to be leading the way in sustainability and reusing the organic matter coming out of these facilities. And that's it, Jen.
All right. Thank you so much, John. This has been incredible information. There's just a lot going on in the water reclamation process and biosolids process that Metro Water Services does. And it's just incredible to see that it's, we're moving to the, as you said, to the UV disinfection, which makes this entire process essentially just a natural process without the use of chemicals. So it's just really, it's a really neat process. I find it fascinating. I hope everybody did as well. So real quick, before we've got a few minutes here before the hour to start jumping into questions. We've got a lot of really good questions. But since we are close to the hour, I'm really quickly just going to mention our next session. So everyone's aware of that. And then we can just save the rest of the time for all of these really good questions that we have had in the chat. They're very good questions, John. I hope you are prepared.
Okay.
So let me pull this up real quick. So just as an FYI, our next presentation for Sustainable in the City, we are doubling up 2 weeks in a row because of the Thanksgiving holiday. So that means that we are going to have a Sustainable in the City again next week. If you just can't have enough, there's more for you next week. Sustainable in the City is going to do Nashville's traffic calming program with representatives from the National Department of Transportation. So it's going to be really interesting to learn about that, especially when we just recently had Walk Bike Nashville talk to us a little bit about what they do. We'll get some information from the NDOT side. So that's next Wednesday at noon. So we're coming at you next week again. But with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Christina, and our questions.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, John. That was wonderful. And you can tell that it is wonderful because we have so many questions. People are really engaged in this one. So we appreciate all your questions, everyone. Keep them coming in the chat, and hopefully we'll be able to get to all of them. Julia, I just saw the one that you added in there. So the first question I want to ask John is kind of a housekeeping question. Are you comfortable sharing your PowerPoint with the folks on this call after via email? Is that something that you'd be comfortable with? Because it seems like people are clamoring to share this information with folks that they also know.
Yeah, that's fine. I'd agree to that. That'll help get the word out there. So, anything visual, that'll help also.
Great, wonderful. So we will make sure that we add that in the follow-up email. So let's just jump in. I tried to start lumping some of these questions together, but honestly, we got so many that we're just going to kind of do it rapid fire, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So the first question we have is from Loretta, and she is saying, do you have to be a chemist or a biologist to work there, to work where you are in Metro Water?
No, not in the water reclamation facility, or I can speak on the water plant. Now, if you were going to pursue that field at our laboratory, you'd have to have some type of biology degree or chemistry degree to start in that department. But as far as the plant operations, no, you don't have to. You'll get that experience naturally with the biology of the plant and seeing how the biology works to help break down the organics coming into the facility.
Great, wonderful. So open to everyone. So Emily has a question, and she wants to know, what is the typical solids retention time? Do you add a coagulant to improve settling?
No, we do not add any coagulants. It's all natural. It's all, that's Mother Nature and the biology of the facility. The retention time or detention time from the time, let's just say a drop of water comes into the facility, it's around, and it's going to be different for the bigger facilities and the smaller. You're looking at around 20 to 24 hours.
And the term reclamation came up with Stephanie. She was not sure what that's actually referring to with these plants. She said that she thinks about this, the type of facility that you were showing pretty early in the presentation, as a sewage treatment plant. Is there a distinction between this reclamation plant and the sewage treatment plant?
No, reclamation is mean we're reclaiming that water. You know, we pump the water from the river for people to wash with and drink. And then when they, you know, flush toilets and you know, kitchen sinks, and it comes to the wastewater facility, we're actually reclaiming that used water and putting it back into the environment cleaner than what we've received it. So we're actually just reclaiming it.
Great. Awesome. And so if you're getting kind of, Emily wants to know for like high strength waste, which I kind of like that terminology, high strength waste, like trucked waste for fats and grease. Do you have to segregate that when you're putting it into the anaerobic digesters, or can it handle it just as it is?
Well, it can handle the fats, oils, and greases. Now we do have a compliance section that keeps you know, these industries in compliance as far as, you know, the heavier waste, the fats, oils, and greases. You know, the restaurants, you know, they'll go out and visit the restaurants, make sure there's not dumping the grease straight down the, you know, the line, so it ends up at the facility. But other than just, you know, naturally the fats, oils, and greases will float, and we'll skim those off, and then they'll eventually go into the digesters.
Great, wonderful. And speaking of those anaerobic digesters, Rachel had a question of how many anaerobic digesters do we actually have in Davidson County?
In Davidson County, I couldn't answer that, but as far as with Metro Water Services, we have a total of 7. Yeah.
Great, awesome. We have an interesting question from Heidi. What security measures are in place at these water treatment plants so that terrorists can't contaminate or poison the water supply? And if that's a question that you can't answer, I know my friend here, Jenn Harrman, might be able to hop in, John. So how do we protect from people tampering with these facilities?
Well, I'll just speak on our the security. We have our own security department that's, you know, vigilant, and they're you know, patrolling and checking, and we have, you know, guards at the entrance gates, you know, to each facility, you know, that they'll stop and you know, ask you for your ID. If it's, you know, if they're not comfortable with it, they have numbers for, you know, managers and security, and they'll make a phone call, and we'll make sure that you know, security issue is addressed.
So you're taking care of it. Jenn, did you want to add anything to that? I think John handled it nicely.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. I would just add that I do know that that Metro Water works closely with the Nashville Police Department, the Fire Department, other Metro agencies, the Office of Emergency Management, as well as the Department of Homeland Security, to make sure that facilities are secure. So, but other than that, yeah, John was exactly right. That's what we do. Keep them safe.
Wonderful. And let's see, we got so many questions, man, this one's good. Let's talk about some of the effluent and things that are being emitted. So Valencia has a question of, is the smell that is emitted from the sewer plants an indication of the overabundance of the microorganisms that are unwelcomed in the process?
It can be. Again, I'll reference back that we waste a certain amount of bacteria out of the system, because if you don't waste anything out, you'll have the biomass will just keep growing and growing until they consume the food coming in, and then they'll die off. And then you'll get the septic, the sulfide, hydrogen sulfide smells, the rotten egg smells. So that's why we keep that, you know, we keep the wasting up, and then that helps us maintain a healthy midpoint in our biomass.
Right. So it can be indicative of something maybe going wrong, but is it also, you know, there are smells no matter what, or is it very much like if you smell something, then something's happening?
Well, it's a distinct smell. I mean, it's not overwhelming smell. It's more of a earthy smell, like dirt or mulch, but that's normal. You know, when we run some of our in-house tests, like a 30-minute cetylometer test that I've mentioned, I'll actually smell it, and it actually smells like dirt or, you know, mulch. So that's just an indicator that, you know, it's stable.
Great, thank you for that clarification. And so Emily also is asking, she asked a question earlier as well, but is the effluent that's coming out fully nitrified?
It does have some ammonia in it. We're not required to totally nitrify. We do have ammonia limits, but our ammonia limits, for instance, here at really at all the facilities, you know, we'll get non-detectable ammonia coming out of the effluent.
Great, and this is a similar question from Emily. Are there restrictions on phosphorus application in the city?
There's not, as of yet, there's not restrictions. We do test for the phosphorus. We are going to fine bubble at the central reclamation facility. We do fine bubble here at Dry Creek, and that enhances phosphorus removal through what's called a luxury uptake. And that's carried out in an anoxic zone, which is called a selector tank. And then it goes into aeration fine bubble, and that helps with phosphorus and the nitrogen removal.
Wonderful. And Stephanie had a question kind of when you get to the discharge part of the process. Even if the discharge quality appears clear, she says there are still pollutants. How do you reduce ammonia in the discharge, for example, has an odor in the river, but is also toxic to aquatic life?
Yeah, well, again, that goes back to you want to keep a substantial amount of the biomass under aeration that'll help consume or break down the nitrogen, which will be the nitrification and denitrification. Make sure there's plenty of air. And it's good that she touched on that, because one of the ways that we can tell if, you know, the water can be real clear, but if we're in what's called nitrification lock, what that does, it consumes chlorine. So the water will look clear, but we could also, or any facility could be violating their E. coli permit, E. coli limits. So that'd be an indication of nitrification lock, even though the effluent water is really clear.
And Julia wants to know, does Metro fluoridate?
That'll be a question for the water treatment. So I wouldn't want to answer that one.
Okay, no problem.
Christina, I'll just add, I did throw in the chat, and I'm pulling up another link. Nashville's Consumer Confidence Report and their full water quality report has some more information for folks if they're curious about the water treatment side, since we didn't touch on that today, so they can find some of that information there. But if they have any additional questions, they can feel free to send them my way, and I will forward those on to folks that can answer those questions.
Great, thank you. And would that be a similar answer for our friend here, Julia, just asked about maybe pharmaceuticals being in the water system? That would also be in that consumer confidence report, correct?
I don't think, I'll be honest, I don't want to say anything for sure, because again, it's not my area of expertise, but I'm pretty sure that the EPA currently is not requiring. I don't know where they're at on the requirements for pharmaceutical testing. So, but I will send those reports out. And I'm not quite sure what they do for that. So yes, that will be a question I will find an answer to, and we can send it in a follow-up.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all for giving it a go, and we will make sure to get those questions to the right folks. So you can reach right out to Jen for that. So couple more questions for you, John. One from Mackenzie. She said she jumped in late, and she said, I assume with all of these steps to treat water, it is better to compost at home versus using the garbage disposal. Is that correct?
Yes, because when you put food waste in your food grinder, garbage disposal, it's food waste are high in BOD, which is the biochemical oxygen demand, and that's the organics the food coming into the facility. And if that's, if we have too much coming in, that just makes the microorganisms have to work that much harder to break those food waste down.
Great. So Mackenzie, even though you were in there late, you still got your question answered. And then our final question, unless folks want to add some more into the comments, is coming from Bill. And he says, does burning the methane or flaring the methane keep it from becoming a greenhouse gas?
Well, it does. It like I said, it flares to burn off the volatile organic carbons. We do have air permit restrictions addresses like the particulate matter and those volatile organic carbons that I just mentioned. Would it become greenhouse gases? I don't think I'd want to answer that, but it's a possibility. I mean, everything's a possibility, but I couldn't, tell him, definitely it does. So.
Right. Any methane that is going into the air will be a greenhouse gas, but you are doing the venting to at least get some of that material out of there.
Right.
Awesome. Great. Awesome. Any other questions for our wonderful, oh, we got one right here. Is Nashville unusual in having this facility, or are they common in cities in general? Thank you, Julia. That's a great question.
Now, are we talking about the nutrient recovery facility, the biosolids facility? Is that what?
Maybe just in case, yes.
Yeah, that's where there's several scattered out across the country. There's, I think Atlanta has some Milorganite. That's their product from, I think it's Pennsylvania. There's some in Texas. There's some in California, and I believe there's one in Hawaii.
Really knew that answer. Awesome. Any other last minute questions? I'll make sure we get every one of your questions answered.
These have been excellent questions today.
Yes.
Really, really good. So clearly folks have been engaged and very interested. John, you're just such an expert on all of this stuff. This has been so interesting. I learn something new every time we chat, every time I take a tour or get a chance to hear any more about our wastewater treatment process and water reclamation. So thank you so much again for being here. I'm also stalling a little bit to just see if we get any other questions, but they are not coming in. So, but if anybody does have additional questions, we'll be sending Christina, you're going to send that follow-up, right?
Yep.
And we'll get some of those other questions answered for you, or any resources we can. And if you have other questions for John, you can send those over our way and we'll get them to him. And with that, I think we're good. We're good to close for the day.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you, John.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see everybody next week, right? Everyone's going to join us next week. Traffic calming. It's going to be fabulous. We've got some experts on traffic calming. It'll be great. So catch us next week. We'll send that follow-up with the recording and the presentation as well. All right. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Christina. Thanks, John. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Okay, thanks. You too.